We've wrapped up all but one game here in Week 9 NFL action. So this video, I'll be breaking down some of my biggest takeaways, 10 of them in fact, from this week's past action, breaking down different fantasy situations, how they've evolved here, or potentially, downgraded themselves throughout this past week or past couple of weeks games, and projecting that stuff and talking through how that impacts stuff going forward here. So these are my 10 lessons learned or takeaways from Week 9 fantasy football. Let's dive right on in. All right, if you guys aren't new around here, you know the drill. I toss a player up on the screen that has something related to our takeaway. We talk through and break the information down and then move on to the next thing. So number one here, the first thing that we have to take away, our lesson learned from this week, starting out with Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears, and the fact that I believe Justin Fields has now asserted himself as an affirmed top 12 fantasy quarterback, otherwise a quarterback one for the majority of fantasy football leagues out there. This guy's been doing really impressive things here the last month plus in fantasy, and the last 2 weeks in particular have been the best football we've seen in his entire career. He's evolving as a player, and this is what we hoped for coming out of the draft, the elite athleticism out of Ohio State. There are very few players at the quarterback position that have the size and speed combination that can do the things athletically that he can, and we're finally seeing that stuff come to fruition, which has been kind of a tedious and painful road, but ultimately I think we're getting there. He just put up the most rushing yards by the quarterback position in a single game in NFL history since they started recording the stat at 178 yards. He also ran the football a team high 15 times in this past week's game. So very, very important stuff. Large implications for fantasy lineups here. He has 4 touchdowns in this game, no turnovers against the Miami Dolphins in Week 9 here. And then the last 2 weeks, 0 turnovers. That is critical, showing some growth in this young quarterback's career here. Justin Fields, the arrow is pointed upwards, and he notched his 5th straight 16-plus point game. Again, showing that consistency and starting to build a body of work here, establishing that fantasy floor. And as we've seen throughout this season, running quarterbacks have been the bread and butter. The pocket passers, especially the veteran ones, have been a little bit more on the struggle bus side of things here as it relates to fantasy and honestly other aspects of NFL life. Another takeaway from that game, Raheem Mostert here, he has got himself a Jeff Wilson Jr. problem. So at the trade deadline, the team goes out and trades for Mike McDaniel's former running back on his staff, or when he was a member of the 49ers staff. He goes out and grabs Jeff Wilson Jr. So you're basically grabbing and assembling the veteran running backs committee here from the San Francisco 49ers, hauling them into house in Miami here. And now this is starting to, in week 1 with Jeff Wilson on this team, which there was an argument to be made that he could be a plug-and-play player, seeing that this is the same exact, obviously system, West Coast zone run offense that he's run in San Francisco. He's familiar with the playbook, didn't take too much time to turn around here, and boom, he walks out there, has a team-high fantasy point total for the afternoon, and ties Raheem Mostert in rushing attempts on the game, as well as adding 3 receptions in the passing game, 1 for a touchdown. So Raheem looked like he was starting to, notch in some niche fantasy value for this season. Looked like he was going to be a guy that at the end of the day was going to have some value for our teams as a quality running back too going forward. I don't know if that's going to be the case here. I think the takeaway for this week's game is that, again, he does have a Jeff Wilson Jr. problem, and this backfield might be pretty divvied up on a week-to-week basis. Jeff Wilson Jr., in case you're wondering, is our top waiver wire claim of the week and our top name to go out and target in this week. Obviously, for approaching Week 10, go check out our waiver episode, which is pretty scarce this week, but is still important for Week 10. That is on the channel right now. DJ Moore, representing the fact that the Carolina Panthers have once again hit offensive rock bottom here. Depressing stuff, man. We're coming off of a back-to-back game stretch where the Panthers productively were able to get out there and put up 16-plus point outings for DJ Moore, and then PJ Walker comes out and, kind of soils his pants here a little bit in this game and has a 30% passing accuracy, 3 of 10 for 9 yards and 2 interceptions. That was just, it was unfortunate. You had Joe Mixon playing with his hair on fire. The Bengals absolutely just stomping all over this poor Panthers team. You had Shaq Thompson talking in the media this week about how this team is resurfaced with their identity, and then this happens, and man, it was a brutal performance here. And the worst part for me is that PJ Walker, who had kind of, introduced the resurgence of DJ Moore's fantasy season for this year. He gets benched, and then in comes Baker Mayfield, and of course the team starts scoring points with Baker on the field. And obviously, as you've seen throughout this season, Baker's been a very negative entity for DJ Moore as it relates to fantasy football. So DJ finished the game with 6 targets on the afternoon, and basically snaps his streak of fantasy relevance here that could have been extended to 3 games, despite the fact that the Bengals were missing their top corner and their passing secondary seemed to be in a bit of shambles here. It didn't play out, and things continued to, get back to those struggling days for him. Another note here quickly before we move on, Deontay Foreman also had a very poor day with just 3 points in half PPR scoring. So all around, back to, the expected norm here for Carolina. Unfortunately, I started to get my hopes up a little bit. I thought this was another nice matchup on paper with that Chidobe Awuzie injury, his ACL, obviously the top cornerback for the Cincinnati Bengals. So just didn't work out this week, and obviously I'm not expecting much positivity if Baker Mayfield is this team's quarterback going forward. CPAT here, man, did he storm back into lineups. I want to talk about actually the points he didn't score starting out with today's takeaway on CPAT. So some missing fantasy points. He ripped about a 30-plus yard touchdown run down the left sideline. It was a really impressive carry. Would have brought up his rushing average per touch as well, and it ended up getting called back for a holding penalty. He still, though, had 2 touchdowns on the day and was still factored into this offense. 14 touches, 53 yards, 2 touchdowns. One of them, he absolutely humbled Drew Tranquill on what might have been, honestly, Dameon Pierce had a pretty dang good run for angry runs this week, but CPAT on the goal line completely just blew over Tranquill on one of the best truck moves I've seen this season. But CPAT looked very good out there. Tyler Algier, if there's anything concerning to take away from this matchup, but again, CPAT did put that awesome run on tape down the left sideline. Could have been another touchdown and obviously brought those point totals up even higher. Algier did average 9.9 yards per carry, 10 rushes, 99 yards. So obviously outpacing Patterson in terms of what the overall efficiency was on the ground today. But at the end of the day, I was extremely impressed with what CPAT brought to the table. I think that this is a positive note going forward for potential RB2 level production. The matchup was there. It was fantastic, and he took advantage of it. But it was his first game back coming off the injured reserve, and obviously you're always a bit pessimistic and conservative and cautious with your evaluation of players coming off of lengthy injury misses. So was really happy to see this stuff from CPAT here again. Just overall impressed with his resurgence here. Marcus Mariota. So this isn't necessarily a lesson learned per se, but this is a major takeaway that continues to shine light on the glaring, just the hideousness of this Falcons passing game. So when I was going through analytics, breaking down the kind of resulting numbers from this week's games, I took a peek at the Falcons-Chargers box score and was kind of reassessing and reevaluating that game after watching it, and much to my shock, Marcus Mariota had a leading receiver this week with 27 yards receiving. That was Kyle Pitts, 2 catches, 27 yards. His next highest receiver was Tyler Algier at 1 catch for 24 yards. So this is a heinously bad passing offense. Mariota's 12 of 23 this week, so barely above the 50% threshold in terms of passing accuracy. And he threw for, 129 yards total, completing passes to 8 different wide receivers. If I told you the guy completed passes to 8 different receivers, you probably would think he had an excellent day. But it's 1 and 2 reception performances for each of these players, and not everyone's really, truly getting involved in this offense. So overall, if Mariota's not running the football, you're going to see lackluster fantasy outings, and in this matchup, he didn't run the ball particularly well. And again, the passing numbers reared their ugly head, and we're left scratching our heads wondering what happened and hoping for a little bit more. And unfortunately, that was the case for this week. We'll move on to another game now with Michael Carter. And I think that beneath the surface level productivity that we saw from Michael this week, it was very good. He was the Jets' top scoring fantasy performer this week at 14.5 fantasy points scored. I think a lot of people overlook the reality of this backfield in a situation that I did not expect to be the case here, of James Robinson actually being heavily factored into this offense and being a large piece here. Now, Michael Carter was the more efficient running back. He was, unofficially the better player because he overall just produced more with the opportunities he was given. After all, Carter this week did have 13 total touches for 86 yards and a touchdown, but James Robinson was right there. 13 rushing attempts, again, 13 total touches for Carter. J-Rob had 13 rushes. another 2 receptions, 5 yards, and a touchdown. He turned his 13 rushes into just 48 yards. But again, the point of me, explaining this to you, despite the fact that he was inefficient, despite the fact that he didn't look awesome out there, is they're getting him involved in this offense. Now, I didn't think he'd have as many opportunities as he did because I thought Buffalo would blow this team out, and they lost. The Jets won the game, meaning the Bills lost. So my expectation of a potential blowout did not come to fruition here. But at the end of the day, Michael Carter may have himself a potential scenario that we're looking at with Raheem Mostert right now where he might have a James Robinson problem. I think that you traded for him for a reason. He definitely provides a service to this offense, particularly inside the 5-yard line that Michael Carter can do, but isn't necessarily elite at. And at the end of the day, I do think that these two are going to kind of cannibalize each other's fantasy values at times. And at others, I think that they're definitely going to knock down each other's ceilings a peg or two, depending on the usage and game script of that matchup, because I think that obviously the passing scenarios favor Carter a little bit, despite the fact that obviously J-Rob had one more reception this week. And of course, the short down and distance situations favor a player like J-Rob a bit more. So an interesting backfield situation to break down here just week 2 with J-Rob in this situation. I'll be keeping a close eye on this going forward, but I did think that there was important takeaways from this matchup. Obviously, just looking at this game from face value. Brian Robinson here talking through some Washington Commanders football now. So we're talking about a player here who basically, coming into this week, I had elevated expectations for B-Rob and overall Antonio Gibson as well, because J.D. McKissic was ruled out of this game. Both of them disappointed. So basically, my takeaway from this matchup is the fact that this backfield situation is just unoptimal in almost every sense of projecting a weekly matchup forward. This is a team where they led. So after the first drive of the second quarter, after the first drive of the second half, so basically they get the football, start the third quarter, they score, they take the lead from that point moving forward and control the game script here until Minnesota kicks a game-winning walk-off field goal. Essentially, they got the ball back with like 10 seconds, the Commanders did. You had optimal situations to run the ball and to produce for your running backs, which, again, another spot where I was wrong in game script evaluation, but I thought Minnesota would control this game far more than they were able to in this contest. And Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, still, neither of them could net more than 50 yards from scrimmage. So without J.D. McKissic, that third kind of wedge in this offense disrupting point production a little bit, you still couldn't find that avenue to score. You still couldn't find a situation where you were having fantasy relevance here and putting forth worthy lineup numbers. Now, for B-Rob, this is another game started for him, and another game with under 4 yards per carry. Inefficient play, lack of pass catching involvement. I've said it every single week. He's a touchdown dependent play, and he is not getting the elite volume on the ground that he needs to sustain even flex level productivity at this current point in time. Kenneth Walker here. This is one of my favorite takeaways of the week. Now, the takeaway here, the lesson learned, is that Kenneth Walker may just be a top 5 rest of season fantasy football running back. Now, for those of you curious, I went ahead and revised my top 5 and took a look at them at least, and really nothing changed too much here drastically, but I took a look at the top 5, and my evaluation is simple. My top 5 currently are Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, and Derrick Henry. Not exactly in particular order, those are just the top 5 names. Kenneth Walker, if he is not in that top 5 group, because that, it's asking a lot of him to kick someone out of that category. If he's not number 5, to me right now, he's the number 6 running back in fantasy football. And if he potentially continues to surge forward from this game going forward, he could get in that category should someone fall off a little bit, should a situation change or see some level of, obviously de-evolution from what we're seeing at this current point in time. He is right there. He is on the cusp. I've got him surpassing guys like Josh Jacobs right now. It's a very close race. Alvin Kamara's got a really good rest of season schedule. We haven't seen him on Monday night yet, but I think if I had to pick one right now, I'd rock with Ken Walker going forward. So he's been absolutely electric. He just notched his 5th straight game with a rushing touchdown. He went over 100 yards again and over 4 yards per carry. The efficiency is there. The production is there. This offense plays really solid, fundamental, run the football, play defense, hit open receivers when they're there. Geno Smith is still playing impeccable football, 6-3 for the Hawks. Who would have thought? Not me, but this has been quite the situation to watch so far throughout this NFL season. And then moving into our last 2 takeaways here, Chris Godwin, for me, does not look the same. This is our 9th takeaway today, and I really didn't want to say this or bring this to light because I didn't want to obviously be negative surrounding Chris Godwin here. I'm a huge fan of him, and I just, the numbers speak for themselves. The opportunity is there, and I will concede the fact that the opportunities have not been of the highest quality. Tom throws a lot of balls into the dirt in front of Chris Godwin that count as targets, but the productivity is just not following. He has had, since returning week 4, 6 games played. In 5 of those 6 games, he's had double-digit targets. This week, he notched 7 receptions. Sounds great, right? 36 yards, 5.14 yards per catch. He has not scored a touchdown since returning to the field. When watching the Rams game in the afternoon window this past week here, or obviously today as I'm recording this video, he looks slow and sluggish out of his breaks. He looks kind of lost in his assignments, honestly. I can't tell you how many times I watched him miss a block in the run game in a bunch formation or a tight set. And I just feel like his usage is not that in which it's going to maximize his optimal level of point production the rest of the way this season. So do I still view him as a top 24 play the rest of the year? Yes. If you're getting double-digit targets nearly every single week, you have to be respected in that way. But I think the way that we look at Chris Godwin's ceiling should have already shifted, if we're being completely honest, based on what we've seen throughout the start of this year since returning from injury. It is definitely far lower than I may have even anticipated at that point in time. Coming by top 12 weeks are going to be hard-pressed to be found here from Chris Godwin. And in these matchups where you expect him to succeed with, Jalen Ramsey's not paying him a whole lot of attention in this matchup. It's a Mike Evans type deal. And regardless, he's not shadowing guys. He's moving all over the field and covering wherever they want to put him. So he's kind of a chess piece more now than ever than he's ever been. And Godwin still couldn't find a way to really put up immense productivity in this game. It wasn't immense at all. He didn't crack double-digit scoring. So for Godwin, it's unfortunate. I really will be tempted this week to once again have him as a buy low candidate because the production is underwhelming and the opportunity is still there. But things could get better with touchdown production. Again, he hasn't scored 1. That is an outlierish number. But just watching the tape and watching him play football, he doesn't look right. He doesn't look 100% of himself. He doesn't look explosive. He's not quick out of his breaks. And Scotty Miller, that's one more thing I want to talk about here. He's the guy getting the looks down the stretch of the contest, getting the quick out patterns because he's getting out of his breaks quick. He's getting off the line fast, and he's getting to the spots Tom wants him at in a quick and efficient manner. And ultimately, he almost had the early touchdown catch to win the game, dropped it, and showed that he's got some unreliability to him, but at the same time, we expected more, at least I did, from Chris Godwin, and thought that he'd be contributing at a higher level to this offense. And then finally here, I think we are right around the corner. So my last takeaway, number 10 here from this week, again, excluding Sunday Night Football, which obviously, okay, so I'm recording this at halftime, if you must know, so that game hasn't wound up yet. Seeing some good things out of Malik Willis in the first half, and of course, Derrick Henry's gone ballistic so far, and then we have not seen Monday Night Football yet either. I'll be recording the waiver wire episode after the games end tonight, obviously, in case something happens in that matchup. But James Conner here is around the corner, I believe, from his true resurgence onto the fantasy football scene. I liked what I saw from him this week. Obviously, not the most efficient player in the world. We knew this going into the season. I think, at least I hope we still remember that going into this contest. Unfortunately, his efficiency was hurt a little bit with an aborted snap. Kyler Murray dropped the football and kind of just, left James Conner out to rot there and ultimately lose a chunk yardage on the play. But overall, had 12 touches, 5 of them being receptions this week for 64 yards from scrimmage. That number would have been very close to 70 yards had that aborted snap play not happened. Again, it's really not making that much of a difference. He had 7.5 points and half PPR scoring this week. But at the end of the day, I was encouraged with what I saw. I was surprised to not see more Eno Benjamin in terms of the usage for this team. I thought that was encouraging for James Conner's stock going forward. I think finally, the buy low opportunities we've had, if you've capitalized on them, and the window is probably open for one more week here because the surface value, the production wasn't great. But I do expect we'll see this offense get back on track here. And in the next game played here for the Arizona Cardinals, I do think that James Conner takes that step back into being a top 24 weekly lineup play and asserts himself as a fantasy relevant player here. So again, we are a game around the corner from James Conner's fantasy resurgence here, in my opinion. And I think that that's obviously a good thing for managers that have had to hold tight on him all season long with little to no sell high opportunity and have just kind of had to bite the bullet with him to this point in the season. So there you guys have it. Those were our 10 takeaways here, our 10 lessons learned, if you will, for week 9 fantasy football now, moving into the week 10 marker, past the halfway marker of this season. It has been a quick year so far. Things are flying by here. We're having a whole lot of fun while doing it. So as always, if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe and like today's episode. We'd love to have you guys join the community and stick around with us, watch episodes, and obviously ask your questions down in the comment section below. Let me know if you guys wrapped up a W this week or how things are looking, who you need to produce for you on Monday Night Football. I'm sure a lot of Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Isaiah Likely, maybe some Lamar Jackson, Devin Duvernay out there as well. Definitely some Lamar Jackson. What am I kidding? Maybe some Andy Dalton in some deeper leagues, some super flex formats. Let me know what's going on with your guys' teams tonight. And of course, I'll see you in the next episode. Peace out.